Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Croccast podcast. I'm your host, Nate, and today I'm joined by Mr. Justin Smith of Palmetto Coast Exotics and the Herpetoculture Network. Justin, welcome to the show.
What's up?
So, you want to get started on how you first got into reptiles and your pathway through the hobby?
Yeah, it's like sort of how everyone else says it's pretty similar to how a lot of us got into it. I was a big fan of dinosaurs as a kid and wanted to be a paleontologist really bad and was obsessed with Jurassic Park and everything else like that. And then of course realized that I wasn't going to be able to find dinosaurs anywhere. So reptiles were kind of the next best thing, but um it hit, yeah. I mean, it hit hard and it stuck. I was a military kid, so my dad was Navy, so we moved around a lot. Um, Anybody who's sort of familiar with being a military kid and all that moving, there's not a lot of constants in life. And so herps was one of those things that I could take with me pretty much anywhere we went, and it stuck and it never went anywhere. And that was, I mean, I was probably 6 or 7. Um, my first snake was a Steraria. Um, that I left on my little table in my room in the sunlight in a critter keeper, and it was just fried. It was just crispy. And after that, I had some rough green snakes, and so pretty much ever since, it's always been I've had something. Um, we lived in Hawaii for a time, so obviously there wasn't really anything happening there, but I did have some Jackson's chameleons, and ended up finding some of those blind snakes too, which I thought was pretty cool. I didn't realize that those were really the only native snake to Hawaii. And I don't even know if they're really technically native, but um, other than that, I pretty much always had stuff. But yeah, it was just a childhood sort of obsession that just morphed into an adult obsession and went from there.
All right. So, how did you first start getting into podcasting?
So there was actually directly inspired from if you're familiar with Joe Phelan and the From the Ground Up podcast. Um, he started that, and after I think he'd been doing it for a couple of years now, but at that point it was one of those things where I was like, man, we could probably do that, and ended up finding my co-host Jake through Instagram. Turns out, I ended up stumbling across him because he was keeping Morelia, and I think there was a hashtag or something at the time that I was following that was Morelia related, so carpet pythons and stuff, and ended up following him, and he followed me back, and then. I noticed he had some really killer stuff, and we kind of chatted a little bit. And then we realized that we lived in the same town. Like he lived on the other side of town here in
Huh.
Beaufort, South Carolina. And so we started hanging out, and then really not long after that had happened, I was like, "Hey, man," I was like, I'm thinking about starting a podcast," and I was like, "You want to do it with me?" Because in Beaufort, there's really not the reptile sort of community or hobby, whatever you want to call it, isn't super popular. Like it's in terms of like people that are like really into it. Um, as far as I know, it's pretty much me and Jake, and there's a couple other guys I know locally that kind of do it. But for the most part, it wasn't. It's not a big thing. So we started it, didn't really know exactly what we were going to do. Um, just kind of kicked it off and was like, whatever happens, happens. It could take off, it could just completely flounder and hit rock bottom at some point or something. But uh, Jake at first was like, "What are we like? What are we even going to talk about?" And I was like, "I don't know. We'll just talk snakes." Like he and I already had times where we were just hanging out, smoking cigars or whatever. And we were just talking snakes and reptiles. I was like, it'd be that same conversation. We're just going to record it.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty much what it morphed into. And that was the first podcast, which was it's the herpetoculture podcast, which we're still doing. We just did episode 169
Nice.
on Thursday. So we're coming up on 5 years of doing that, which is crazy because it's gone by so quick. But we've been doing that every week, more or less, for the last 5 years, and it's morphed into some other stuff with the network and some other shows that I guess we can get into and stuff, at some point. But it started with him and I, and it stuck. We really over time it got better. As a lot of podcasts, it starts out really rocky because you're still sort of finding your groove, with things. Um, and after a while, we found that routine and the uh, our niche, so to speak, and it's just been fun. We've been doing it ever since. So.
All right. So currently, what all do you have in your collection?
Kind of, it's morphed over the years. Right now, it's a lot of corn snakes, a lot of Baird's rat snakes. I've got some Chinese Elaphe, so Elaphe Dion and Elaphe bimaculata. I got some rhino rats. I got some chondros. Got some Gonyosoma jansseni. So those are the black-tailed rat snakes. Some Trans-Pecos rats. A couple of pine snakes. So one southern, and my buddy Chris Painshab at Badlands Herpetoculture just sent me a Janai not that long ago. So it's the Mexican pine, I think is the common name. And then I got a pair of Ackies, so a little bit of everything. I was traditionally, I think colubrids have always kind of been my thing, but I have a very big soft spot for chondros and green tree pythons. That's definitely sort of, in terms of Morelia, I've kept carpets and stuff over the years, but chondros, there's just something about them that those will always be an obsession to some degree. That whole side of things as far as breeding and whatnot has pretty much been put on pause. So that's kind of why I've shifted focus a little more to the colubrids and stuff, for the time being, until I can kind of get back into breeding chondros. But for the most part, it's a lot of Pantherophis.
Gotcha. So listening to your podcast, it's really obvious you have a real fondness for Baird's rat snakes. So you want to go over those guys and what you find, what you love about them, basically.
Man, so I loved them before, and then last year, myself and Phil, who I do Snakes and Stogies with, which is our live show, we went out with the Morelia Python Radio guys out to West Texas last year in June, and we were in sort of the home turf of Baird's rat snakes. And I loved them before that, but I loved them even more after being there and seeing. We didn't see any, but seeing the habitat and seeing what they're living through day in, day out. It's an intense area. Like, it's hot, dude.
Yeah.
There's really no escape in the sun, sort of, unless you're going underground or in the rocks and stuff. And so seeing the whole habitat and stuff was awesome. But that's the species in particular that, for whatever reason, never got super popular. They never really took off. And that's something in herpetoculture in particular that I've always found interesting, is species that are awesome. They're not necessarily hard to breed. They're not hard to take care of, but they just never sort of got their time in collections and stuff. And so Baird's, I think, are one of those. It's just a species that, like, yeah, they don't come in a bunch of neon colors, but there are some that are crazy silver with orange at the base of the scales, so it looks like sort of lava under steel, like really wild. And I've got those, and like there's a Mexican type that has a gray head and like a solid yellow body almost. But they're a bigger species of Pantherophis that's native to Southwest Texas and into just over the border into Mexico. And then there's another sort of island population below that in Mexico. And they're just, they're a big desert rat snake. At one point they were related or classified as a subspecies of Obsoleta. So they were sort of lumped in there with yellow rats because they do have a similar striping in some of them, depending on the locality. And then eventually they got their own species. So there was a debate at one point or another if the Mexican types counted as a subspecies, and I think they were labeled one at one point. I don't even remember what the name was, but eventually I guess they did some studies and they said no, they're not different enough to be their own thing. So it's they're a larger species of Pantherophis. I just hatched out, so I got some babies hatching right now actually, and they come out the size of probably twice the size as a baby corn. They're hefty little babies, but we're talking bigger snakes, so there's smaller clutches but bigger eggs. Super easy to take care of. I keep them the same way I keep my corns. They seem to be a little more sensitive in terms of feeding in larger meals. So in that capacity, they're not really like a corn. Just as easy to breed, just all of them are really mellow too. I've got a couple that they're not bitey, but they are flighty. And there's Aneries, which haven't even really hit the scene yet because Tim Spuckler's kind of the only guy that's got the visual. There's one male visual Anery Bairds, and he's got it, at least that we know of. And then there's hypos, which also get called albinos. It is a T plus albino, so you could kind of use those terms interchangeably. And then you got all the different localities and stuff. And so it's a species that I was amazed as I posted them more and talked about them more, how many people came forward and were like, I've never even heard of these before. You know, like I was completely unaware that these even existed. And I have gotten people into them now, and people are starting to keep them. And even, you know, some of the buddies that I have that keep them now, they're like, dude, these are awesome. Like, I wish I had gotten them way sooner. You know, so they're just an awesome species of American rat snake, man, that needs much more credit than it's given.
Yeah. So with your chondros, what's been your experience with them?
Oh, so like my recent years experience, or like my very first experience, because those were two completely different situations.
Well, what do you say? The first one sounds more entertaining, so let's go with that one.
Man. So the first one, I bought a green tree. It was just a Biak. It was an import. Got it off Underground for, I paid like $350 or $400 for it at the time, and I got it, and I set it up sort of the way that I thought green tree should have been kept. Because there's a ton of outdated sort of information in terms of chondros and how we keep them and how they should be kept, and the idea that people think in comparison to like emerald tree boas, you know, there's two very different sort of biomes that we're dealing with there. And so I think people have always, at least since the 70s, 80s, 90s, we always assumed that they were supposed to be kept super humid, super hot. And I had this one set up in a like a very odd aquarium. It was like a 10-gallon, but it was taller and like thinner. And I had, some live plants in there and some like grapewood perches. And long story short, it rolled on me after like a month. And I was like, I'm never keeping these things again, because I thought it was awesome, because as a kid in Reptiles magazine, seeing the the Signal Herp ads with Rico Walder's stuff and whatnot, I'm like, man, those are awesome. It's a really cool snake. Maybe one day I'll own one. I think I remember cruising King Snake and seeing the prices and being like, yeah, probably not. So I got that one and it rolled, and I was like, oh man, I'm never keeping these things again. That was probably, I think that was 2011, maybe. And then you fast forward to 2016 or 2017, came across a Biak on Craigslist. I had a pair of caramel carpets. So I messaged this guy. I was like, hey, I got these carpets. You want to trade? And he said, sure. Went down there, got him. Like, that animal was in really rough shape. He gave me issue after issue for the longest time. Didn't, he wouldn't eat anything but live for the first like year that I had him. Still have that snake. His name's Problem Child as a result. And then I found a female, and then, over time I slowly got another one here, another one there, did some trading with some buddies after I had my first clutch, and now I have, I think, about 10 of them. And my perception of them now compared to then is completely different. I mean, they are an extremely easy snake to keep. They're not difficult. A lot of it depends on your location and what sort of like what's your ambient humidity and overall weather are like in your area. Like down here in the Southeast, it's humid all the time. Like, it's brutal here right now. I mean, it's like 97, but with the humidity, the heat index ups it to like probably in the triple digits easily. And even with the AC running, like, humidity isn't really an issue. I don't have that problem. Temperature wise, like, we have really mild winters, so it's not a big issue either. But if you're out west, you're probably going to have issues with humidity. If you're up north, you're probably going to be dealing with cooler temps overall. But in my opinion, I think they're extremely easy to keep as long as you sort of give them what they need, which seems and sounds kind of redundant, but they're they're a snake that does fabulous if you kind of ignore their existence.
Sort of a willful neglect.
Yeah.
So like a kind of like Boyga in that regard.
Yeah.
So for those of us who haven't had a green face and can't really seem to find a good source in their care, what do you say is the best way to keep them?
I keep mine really simply. So I have mine and I have a big Cambro tub rack. So that's that really hard plastic that restaurants use to store food and stuff. This was an old Habitat Systems rack, so it was convenient because I got it from a local friend. I do love the Cambro tubs. That rack is like 7 foot tall, and it takes up a very large chunk of my room. So for that aspect, I hate it. But the Cambro tubs work great. I keep mine really simple, just a puppy pad. They have a perch that sits in the corners of that tub, and then they have a big water bowl. And then there's usually pothos growing in most of them. There's a few that aren't, but I've kept them like that for the longest time. Doesn't matter if it was neonates or juveniles or subadults or adults. I have one right now that's in sort of a quote unquote like naturalistic setup where he's on mulch. He's got a pothos that's planted and growing in that cage. And I don't really see a major difference between the two. I just prefer the puppy pad method because it's just easier to clean up. Like chondros, when they go for food, like they give it 100%. They don't really half-ass grabbing food. So like my issue with particulate substrate in that regard is because they get so excited. I worry about them grabbing the mouse and then some of the cypress mulch or whatever you might be keeping them on. And to me, it's just easier to keep them like that. And then my room is right now, because of my Ackie cage, it's an ambient heat. So we're looking at, I think the highest it'll get is probably in the mid to upper 80s if it's a really warm day, because I have a window in that room.
Yeah.
And then they'll drop down into the 70s at night. They don't need a lot of heat. In my opinion, like I said, it's going to depend on where you live. If you're living up in like Canada or like upstate New York or something like that, then it's probably going to be a different story. But down here in the South, I don't worry about them too much. I don't really miss mine. I missed them when they're younger. When I notice that they have a bowel movement in the works, then I'll miss them, because sometimes that'll trigger them to fork that over. And then feeding, I mean, my policy with at least my adults is if I can't really remember the last time I fed them, then they're probably due. I am of the opinion that they're a leaner snake that isn't meant to be super massive, super heavy. Beox kind of being the exception just because they are naturally larger. So I like to keep mine on the leaner side. I don't like to pump them with food. The last couple months, I've actually been sort of going between frog legs and mice. So depending on the animal and the size, they'll either get like a whole leg, bone and all, or they'll get sort of a chunk of the thigh meat. I have one smaller one right now that's like a yearling, and I'll feed that one some frog leg periodically. But other than that, I mean, they're, like I said, like they're Morelia, so if they're refusing food, something's wrong. And they're just, you could feed them every day and they'd eat. Like I've had some that I fed them and they went right back to perching and started caudal luring again. It's like it's unbelievable. Those things are just voids. They're just stomachs. It's crazy.
Yeah. So you mentioned you've produced at least one clutch. How many clutches of chondros have you produced over the years?
Just the one. That was the first and only time I've bred those, unfortunately. And the reason I mentioned earlier about sort of I've shifted focus on colubrids for the time being is because the adult female that I had that produced that first clutch, she had some issues and she ended up passing on me. So she was my only adult female that was breedable. Everything else I had was either male or still really young, so pretty much breeding condos got put on pause. I was hoping that maybe later this year I'd be able to get back to it, but I'm really thinking that the animals that I have aren't going to be quite of size to where I want them to be. So they'll probably end up just going another year, and it won't be until 2023, like the fall or winter, that I start pairing condors again. So we'll see. But yeah, it was just the one clutch, and it was a really good learning experience. I learned sort of what I would change up from how I did things that first time, and it makes you appreciate sort of the stuff like your corns and other things a little better, because that stuff just doesn't require, it's not as stressful. That I talk about that with like the Baird's rats and stuff. Like you got to have the stuff that's more complicated and requires a little more attention to detail, but then you also got to sort of balance that with the other stuff that just isn't nearly as difficult, and it will hatch at room temperature. Just you gotta have a little bit of both. If you're working really, really sort of intense, detail oriented stuff, like that's cool and all too, but there's something to be said for having a species that's just a breeze that just gets it done.
Yeah. Let's see here. So I'm a big fan of scrub pythons, so I know you've kept some in the past. So I've heard your opinions about them, very strong opinions, and in my opinion, very incorrect opinions. But what's your experience with keeping scrubs? And that incorrect part was a joke, just to clarify.
Oh no, you're fine. I don't. I had my Phil for as like a wedding present gave me a Tannenbar scrub that he had.
I need to get your type of friends.
Yeah. He had it. He was like, I don't really know what I want to do with it. I don't have any real plans for it. I don't think I'm going to come across another one. And I had Jake had a scrub. I think his is a Barneck, if I'm not mistaken. And I know Jake had his for a while before I got mine, and it was cool. And I was like, I looked into Tannenbars a little bit because Phil had showed me the one that he got, and I did a little bit of reading on. I was like, okay, this might be like the right move for me, because it's a scrub, but it doesn't get huge. It's not a big scrub. Tannenbars stay small, so I was like, this might actually work out. So I brought him home from Daytona. I think it was last year, and I kept him for a while, and I had him for up until a couple months ago. And it was like he was they're very cool snakes. Like, I will say that. I understand why people like them. I enjoyed it for the most part, having it. The frustrating part was cleaning. It took, you get them out of the cage, no problem. Getting them back was always a chore. So it was like anytime I had to clean that cage, it was like, okay, here we go. Like, let me make sure I got like a half hour of my day cleared, because getting them out is going to be easy. Getting them back in isn't going to be. I got to take everything out. I got to put everything back in. As soon as you touch them, they spray urates and stuff everywhere, like a cannon. For some reason, what I was reading said that Tannenbars were like the most mellow of all the scrubs, and that is definitely not the case. And so after a while, my buddy Travis Wyman, he was looking for his daughter, I guess, was going to get a bigger scrub from somebody else, and he was okay with it, but it wasn't ideal, and that fell through. And so I was like, oh, well, if you're interested in this Tannenbar, he can sell them to you. And he took it, and now, his daughter's loving it. So he went to a good home. Scrubs just aren't for me. Like I said, I appreciate them. I think they're gorgeous snakes, and I really like them. But as far as keeping them, it's just one of those species that I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I had my taste, and I think they're a group that seems to sort of come and go in waves in terms of popularity. I think a lot of people see them, sort of have this romanticized idea of what keeping them is going to be like, and then they get them, realize that it's not what they thought it was going to be, and then they end up getting out of them. And so you see like this sort of cycle of like a lot of people buying scrubs, and then after a year or two, you see a lot of people selling scrubs. And I mean, even Jake, I think Jake's kind of fallen out of love with them too. Like he has his still, but he's like, he's like, man, it's just they're stupid accurate when they strike. Like they're little heat seeking missiles. But they're a handful. Like that's all it is. You know, they're just a handful. You know, they're not a Brettles python by any means. And Brettles are like my measuring stick for a lot of python species in terms of awesomeness.
Gotcha.
What are your thoughts on scrubs? Like, where do you?
I personally at the moment only have a juvenile female Tannenbar, but though I do have another male, or I have a male ordered off Morph Market, so hopefully we'll get a few years to get something going with those guys. But
hell yeah,
with my female, I never experienced any of those problems so far, which just might be because she's small still, but I never had her urate on me or anything like that.
Yeah.
Or
never... Well, that may be the difference too, because I think this guy, I got him as an adult. Phil had him as an adult. I don't know. I doubt it was captive bred. So that could be a very big differentiating factor, is the fact that you're dealing with young captive bred animals that seem to adjust better than.
I'm 90% sure she's import. So
yeah. Well, even then, getting them at a younger age, like I've noticed with chondros too. Like you get them younger, if they're imports, they seem to adjust a lot faster to captivity compared to like that, you know, problem child, that adult male green tree. I have no idea how old that snake is. If I had to guess, he's probably in the realm of like 6 to 7 years old, and he's never fully sort of chilled out. You know, he's always been really rambunctious. The female that I paired him with, she came in, she was imported at a young age. She was a massive biok, but she was really mellow. Like once I got her out, she was fine. Every now and then you'd kind of open the door and she'd be a little bitey, but I think it was mostly a food thing. But she was a doll when she was out. But some of the other animals that I've seen that are adult imports, like I don't think they ever fully relax. You know, they're always on edge.
Yeah. So you recently have gotten into locality corn snake breeding. You want to go into that a little bit?
Absolutely. Being here in Beaufort, South Carolina, I am in what I consider the mecca for corn snakes, the famous Okatee Hunt Club that was so popular for so many years, you know, decades ago for the corn snakes that came out of that area. You know, that's a short drive from where I live. To me, like the corns we have here in the very bottom corner on the coast of South Carolina, those are some of the best in the world. And so I have my locality project is from the island that I live on here. So Beaufort County itself is made up of a lot of islands and barrier islands, and I live on one that's fairly large. And over the last probably 5 or 6 years, I've just come across some corns that were on the smaller side. One of them was that I raised up since it was a fresh out of the egg neonate. And so I have a group of 3. I have 2.1 on the Ladies Island stuff, and then I have another one that's from sort of the quote unquote mainland part of town. That's technically just Beaufort County itself. And that's a female too. So that's my sort of locality stuff that I have at the moment. Just hatched out a clutch of the pure Ladies Islands, they're F1s, and then I hatched out a clutch of a Ladies Island male that I paired to a ghost tessera female. So I've got, a clutch of like half tesseras, and then everything's het ghost, and those look really cool. So it's the locality thing has just been fun because I love the ability to continue breeding that and seeing what happens with that over the coming years, but also sort of having the spare males around and stuff to sort of plug it into some of the other morph stuff and see what happens, and just enjoy it and have fun with it. Corn snakes were something that me and my dad bred together back in 2000 or 2004, and so I've always had a soft spot for them. And up until the last year or so, I've really sort of, I guess, fallen back in love with them in a sense, and really started going hard on them. And now a pretty big chunk of my collection, if not at least half of it, is corn snakes, not even counting all the babies and stuff. So,
oh, dang.
It's yeah.
So, what's something that kind of visually sets Lady Islands apart from your standard looking corn snake?
At first glance, in comparison to sort of just your standard, I guess, wild types, in my opinion, not a whole lot. To me, it's they're special to me because it's right here from home. Like that's kind of the appeal to me. To most people, they're probably going to look at it and be like, "Oh, yeah, it's just a normal looking corn snake." And there is some, like I have noticed some of the holdbacks from last year. They have just these really nice, deep burgundy saddles. There's a couple that seem to have these really oddly wide saddles. They start out with this sort of gray base that is morphed into like this nice sand tannish color. The recent clutch that I hatched out of the Ladies Island, that was the same dam from last year, but a different sire. Those have come out really interesting. Those are starting to really color up already, which is wild because those hatched at the 4th of July, like that same weekend is when that clutch started hatching. So I'm only keeping a couple holdbacks, but for the most part, yeah, if you're someone that's into the morphs and stuff, you're probably going to look at them and not be all that impressed. If you're someone that's into locality stuff, then you'll kind of get it, you'll understand, you'll have the appreciation for it. But honestly, for the most part, they're nice in the way that a nice wild type South Carolina corn snake can be, if that makes any sense. They're definitely not anything like the Jaspers that have the crazy thick saddle borders and the neon oranges or anything like that. But my plan with that whole thing though is to line breed and see what happens, especially with what I have raised up from last year. If I can get a male up to size by this time next year or slightly before that, I'll try and pair them back to the mom to see what happens. I'm just having fun with it. It's just a little sort of pet project, I guess, if you want to call it, but it's just fun. It's just cool. Like I said, it's a cool sort of homemade project. The fact that it's right here in my backyard kind of thing, I love. But grand scheme, yeah, they're really not anything phenotypically to do a double take at. But
yeah. So do you have any plans for your collection moving into the future?
I'm not sure. It's space is tight, sort of the biggest issue right now. That's kind of become at the forefront of things to figure out, is definitely space and what I'm going to do moving forward. If I'm going to be breeding more than I have this year, which this year's I've produced more stuff than I've ever produced, at least on the snake front. Because there's a ton of stuff I want to get into. Like I have some rhino rats now, and I that is one of my all-time favorite species of snake. And so I plan on breeding those, and like those are going to require some work because those aren't something like the corns that you can just sort of drop feed and not have to put a lot of effort into. Those are going to be a little more tricky to get them started and established. More chondros, same way. So I don't know. I keep telling myself I don't need more corns, but then I see some of the stuff that my buddy JT at Silent Hill Reptiles keeps popping out and putting on his available page, and my buddy Chris at Badlands Herpetoculture keeps hatching out some just insane stuff. So it's tough. I obviously like everyone else. If I could buy it all, I would. If I had the space for all of it, I'd have it. But it's definitely getting down to the wire where I kind of have to be a little more picky about what I end up bringing in. And even from like a biosecurity standpoint, you got to be kind of mindful of who and what is coming into your room, animal wise, not necessarily people, but yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with what I have as far as chondros now. So I don't really plan on diving into those anymore than I already am. Baird's rats kind of, I'd like to bring in some more diversity into the blood of what I have. Corn snakes, it's just there's too much cool stuff. There's too many cool morphs. There's too many cool combinations. It's really hard to pinpoint what I want to sort of focus on there in terms of the morph stuff and sort of stick to it. And then the Dion's rats and the twin spotted rats, so the Elaphe bimaculata and the Elaphe Dion, those are also two species that not a lot of people in the States are really doing stuff with anymore. So I'm planning on pursuing those. Maybe some pines. I like my southern pine. She's cool. That's a big, impressive animal when they get to adult sizes. So
yeah,
there's a. I may get her a boy at some point. I don't know. Jake has two. He has a pair, so she may just get put in with her with his male and get some hets or something. But I don't know. It's kind of just taking it easy right now and planning for the future in terms of what I want to do with pairings and stuff, and trying to think long term and trying to make it happen. It's just tough, man. There's just too much cool stuff.
Yeah. So you mentioned your Asian Elaphe species, Dion's and the bimaculata. What's like working with those and keeping those?
They're really cool. They're small, which is it's really surprising. So Dion's at one point did seem to have a pretty dedicated following in the US. In Europe, they're crazy popular. Like there's a lot of people keeping them, a lot of people breeding them. There's a ton of localities, and there's a huge array of colors and patterns that they come in. And then here in the States, for whatever reason, they had a period of time where they were popular, but it seems like it's really sort of waned. Maybe it's because around that same time, you had other stuff going in popularity, like the ball python craze and some of the other stuff. But I'm hoping to bring them back. I mean, they're an awesome. My adult female is probably slightly bigger than an adult, like a decent sized adult corn. And not even like in length. Like in length, they're probably about the same. They're just a little stockier. And then my male is like the size of probably a year and a half, 2-year-old male corn. And they're cool snakes. They're like I said, it's amazing that how they aren't more popular just blows my mind, because like I said, they come in a bunch of different colors, bunch of different patterns. The bimaculata are a little different. Those are even smaller. Those also come in a decent array of sort of patterns and colors. I don't think they're as diverse in that regard as Dion's are, but that was a species, so they have to get really cold to breed. And so I cooled everything off in my garage over the winter here. But unfortunately, because it's South Carolina, winter doesn't really kick in until like January. So it's like Christmas Day and it's like 70 degrees. And I'm sitting here going like, nothing's going to go. Like it's too damn warm. And so I was really worried actually that the bimaculata and the Dion's wouldn't go, but the Dion's did. Bimaculata didn't, but last night he was chasing her around like crazy. So I don't know what the deal is there, because if they lay, like if he makes it happen and they just end up laying eggs in, what is it? It's about to be August. Like it'll be bizarre, because that's just not, my room is warm. Like it's way warmer than what they would get for brumation. I mean, we're talking about a snake that needs to get probably in the upper 40s, low 50s to really make something happen. So who knows what's going to happen there, but I was bummed that bimaculata didn't go, but the Dion's did, and I got a really nice clutch from them for the first time. It was a Siberian male to a Beijing female, and they're this odd. So they have eyes that remind me of like Gonyosoma, but they have like the pattern of a garter snake, but they're glossy and they're smooth like corns. They're just this sort of odd combination of things, and they're just really cool. I mean, they're pretty mellow for the most part. My adult male is not. My female, she's pretty chill when you get around. All the babies are pretty mellow. They rattle their tail a lot, kind of like the Bairds do. But they're if anyone is curious, like go on Google and look it up. Like you can see pictures of the stuff people are doing in Europe, and There's some that are just fire engine red, solid fire engine red, and that's it. Like there's some that have a pattern that are that color. There's melanistic types. There's some that have white, like pinstripes. My male, that Siberian male, he's like this apricot pink after he sheds and stuff, and it's wild. You know, the adult female, the Beijing girl, she's got like this really nice antique wood mahogany red going on, with like this sort of dirty tannish khaki color in between the saddles and stuff. It never seems to translate well over in pictures, but it's one of those species that it makes more sense when you see them firsthand. You know,
that's one thing I really wanted to do with my podcast is want to interview someone in Europe, just get kind of a perspective of European herpetoculture, but fortunately just don't know who to reach out to get them on. So
I know some people. We'll hunt them down.
Might have to text you about that sometime. So
yeah. It's interesting, and I think actually U.S. herpetoculture is starting to kind of shift. I've always considered sort of what the European guys do, you know, the European model of smaller collections, but more elaborate, bigger setups. And then you have sort of the U.S. Walmart version, which is like get as many animals in a room as possible. I feel like I kind of ride both sides of that fence fairly evenly. I'm not an anti-rack guy by any means. I think they do serve their purpose. I think they're suited well for some species and not for others. I'm a firm believer that if the recipe calls for you to do a 6-foot cage, do that. If the recipe calls for a 32-quart tub, do that. You know, and that's the problem is, like, you see a lot of the European folks, especially, you know, when I post videos on YouTube and stuff, you know, they're like, oh, the chondro cages need more. Like, you can't just have a perch. That's cruel. And I'm like, it works. Like, the animals are doing fine. Like, I'm not having any issues. There's no other basis that you can sort of, there's no other measuring stick aside from like being able to hear the animal's thoughts and know what's going on. Like, I can give them as much as I can. And if they're eating, if they're breeding, if they're not having any health issues, then clearly they're okay. Like, you can only do so much, if that makes any sense. I'm trying not to get too tinfoil hatty, but I don't know. I do think there is a shift, though, as U.S. herpetoculture starts to seem to adopt more of the smaller collections with the larger vivaria, you know, all out sort of. The one person that comes to mind is Roy Blogett. He's out west, and he's got what species is it? Spilotes or Pacillinotus. But he's got them in just these massive vivaria with like live plants, and it's awesome. And he has a small collection in comparison to a lot of people, but he really went all out on their setups and stuff, and it's awesome. Like, that's the way he likes to do it. But I love it because he's also not one of those guys that's going to sort of give you a hard time if you're not doing it that way either. You know, he understands that not everyone does it the same way, and that he does it because he likes to do it that way. And it is nice to, like, I understand racks. I can understand why people wouldn't be into them. I like them. I use them. But I use them on species that I know are going to work well with them. So, like my Goniosoma jansenii, that's not a species that I would keep in a rack. Like, that's an active species that's moving around a lot. Like, they need space. They climb. You give them the space, they're going to use it. Is kind of the thing. Like, if they're in a rack, I feel like, yeah, they'll probably feel secure and do okay. But, you know, mine have UV, tons of hiding spots, live plants, you know, a nice big laybox or humid hide, whatever you want to call it. And I just think that that's what that species calls for. You know, it's something like a blood python or something else that's much more of a ambush predator. That's more about sort of just lying in wait in a small area and feeling more secure in an enclosed, smaller space. Than if it does better in a rack than it does in a cage, then put it in a rack. You know, it's pretty easy. I don't understand why there's this giant argument over what's better or worse. It's like, do what the recipe calls for.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of a larger thing with herpetoculture in general. Just, I mean, I haven't really dived headfirst into herpetoculture, the culture of it, so to speak. But I've dipped my toe in it. It just seems like every issue is a fierce cutthroat debate.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting.
Basically, it's drama for people who don't watch Real Housewives of LA.
Yeah. It's one of those things too, where it's not even worth. I don't bother getting into arguments with people on the internet over that kind of thing. It's like, look, my animals have nothing to do with you. Your animals have nothing to do with me. Just because I keep mine a certain way has zero bearing on how you keep yours. Like, yeah, you may not like it. It may not be your thing, and that's fine. Like, there is no right or wrong answer. It's just like, as long as the animals are healthy and as long as everything's long term, no health issues, you're not having to go to the vet every other week because there's some new problem cropping up, then you're doing something right. It's working. We can only do so much with the information we're given on a regular basis.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, do you do any like herping at all?
I try to. I don't do as much as I'd like to. Jake gets out way more than I do. He's got a handful of really good spots that he road cruises. And a lot of that is mostly because my prior job, I was working 10 to 8 or 10 to 9, 5 days a week. So getting out at the right times and stuff didn't really work out. So now I'm working a regular 9 to 5 and I have weekends off. And so Jake and I keep talking about going out and doing more herping. It just doesn't seem to happen as much. We did go out road cruising like 2 weekends ago. We didn't find anything, but he's got a couple like WMAs he really likes to go to that I haven't been out to yet. So we're definitely planning to. I think now that it's like we're sort of in the middle of summer and it's just brutal. So I think we're planning to do some more as it starts to cool off some once we start getting into early fall and things start moving around again. But yeah, it's traditionally it's been something that I've done. I can't say that it's something I've ever really enjoyed, except for West Texas. That was a different story because that was just everything was so new to me. I've never been there before, so it was like another planet. But in terms of herping around here, I spent a lot of time over the summers as a kid, like going out and tromping around the woods and trying to find stuff and rarely really finding anything. And whether that was me or whether it was just the environment around here is just screwed and there's no snakes besides black racers, I don't know. It's probably me, but really, I don't know. It's kind of like the reason I don't really go fishing with my parents anymore. Like they used to go fishing a lot, and it's like after a while sitting on a boat all day in the sun is just not fun anymore. Yeah. So I like road cruising because you can, it's road cruising. You're not running around the woods. You're not getting eaten alive by chiggers and ticks and gnats and stuff. It's glamping. It's the glamping version of herping. It's the giant RV instead of a tent and calling it camping. It doesn't count.
Yeah. Let's see here. I was about to say something. Oh yeah. So you mentioned that the only thing sometimes the students you find down there are like racers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a friend in East Texas. He was setting up a line trap on his property to see what he has on there, and just finished the boxes up. And he put his box in his yard. Didn't even put up any fencing to lead to him or anything like that. He comes back a few hours later. He's already got a few racers stuck in them.
Yeah, they're everywhere down here. Sort of the cool thing about Ladies Island, though, is that we have one of the largest populations of coral snakes in the state. Of course, everyone on my block sees them on a regular basis, and I see dead ones on the road all the time, but I never see a live one. So it's kind of been a running joke between my wife and I, because she's seen a live one not that long ago, and I have not. I have neighbors text me pictures of them all the time, and they are in fact coral snakes. It's not like a scarlet snake or scarlet king or something that they would think was one. So they're there. I was going to message Jack Vicente, who does a lot of venom collection from corals, and ask, because he's like the coral guy, especially Fulvius, the Easterns, and basically be like, what do I got to do to find one of these things? Like I haven't seen a live one in incredibly long time, probably at least a decade. Seen plenty of dead ones, but I never can seem to come across a live one. And so I'm like, what am I? Is there like a certain magical hour I'm supposed to just be looking around? Like, is there a certain weather I'm supposed to be looking for that seems to be more conducive to corals? I don't know. It's been it's frustrating because I have neighbors tell me all the time, yeah, I saw another one. And then I see there was not even that long ago. I think like last month, I saw like 3 dead on the road, just on like my street, the next street over, and like the other street on the way out. It's just, and like big ones, like decent sized adults. And I'm like, what the hell, man? It kills me because that's probably my favorite native venomous for sure, but probably one of my favorite native snakes or reptiles, period. And I can just never see one that's alive. Raw road pizza.
Well, okay. Well, now you mentioned, I'll probably next time I'm down herping South Carolina, I'll probably stop at Ladies Island and look for those corals.
Yeah, man. They're definitely here. Like I said, there's no shortage of them. I actually think so. I've seen a lot since we bought this house back. We've been in this house for almost 3 years now. I've seen more eastern glass lizards or legless lizards than I've probably ever seen. And so I actually, like, as I walk around and see those, it kind of made me think, like, I wonder if because we have so many of those, that has, at least in my little area here, if that has some sort of bearing as to why there's so many corals, because I've seen more of those legless lizards than I've seen pretty much any other species. And it's a pretty prime food item for corals.
Yeah.
So I actually wonder if there's some sort of correlation there, but correlation, that's pretty
good. Good one. Yeah. Let's see. Are there any future plans for your podcast?
I don't know. So like, the Eric Burke and the NPR guys, like, they've added a bunch of shows to their network and stuff now. As it stands for us, we've got THB, which was like the flagship show that started everything. Then we have Snakes and Stogies, which is what the live show that Phil and I do, Phil Wolf. We do those on Monday nights. And then we have ChondroCast, which was a podcast that I haven't done in a while, but it was chondro specific. Started Corn Stars within the last year. That's a corn snake focused podcast.
Excellent name.
And then we have Lizard Brain Radio, which Bill Bradley does. And I think that's it. Should be it. I keep wanting to do like an invert show because there was a point where I was keeping a lot of scorpions and tarantulas, but it's just one of those things where finding the time is tough. It's not as bad now because I was doing the herpetoculture magazine with Billy Hunt of Uwabami Reptiles. We did that for about 2 years. As of January, we kind of put that to bed. So there was a point where I was just incredibly busy with stuff all the time, and I'm adding more things to the workload, like new shows and things like that. It wasn't going to happen then. It may change now that I have a little more time to do things, but I don't know. I'm also kind of happy with where we're at now and what we've got, and yeah, I just like with Corn Stars. I noticed there was a point where there was a podcast from that Donovan Winterberg did that was Corn on the Pod. ChondroCast was kind of a result of GTP Keeper Radio. They do episodes like twice a year, and so I went to Bill Stiegel, who was a host, was like, hey, if I start this show, like, are you cool with that? And even that's sort of fallen by the wayside. I don't think I've done an episode of that in the last like 6 months, but it's mostly just schedules. I have a family and my own collection to keep up with, and so it's sort of balancing everything has been tough. But I don't know what the overall like future plan is. Our policy has kind of always been like, just let it take us where it takes us. Don't force anything, just ride the wave. And it's served us well so far. It's watching the growth of it has been crazy. Jake and I, when we started THB, it was like, no one's gonna care about this. No one's gonna listen to it. This could last 2 months, it could last 2 years, who knows? And I think that's a big part and why it's still kicking and doing its thing is it's just not going into it with no preconceived notions about what you want it to be or how big you want it to be, just letting it do it itself and carry itself. And I don't know, it's you see a lot of podcasts sort of start up and there's that initial sort of vigor of shows for 6 months or so, and after a while just life gets in the way or people don't see the traction that they want from it, and so they kind of ditch it. And I think the secret to making it sort of last is just consistency and putting in the work to help it grow and stuff. But also, just like I said, not really, if you go into it not expecting anything, I think that's the best sort of the best way to do it. But
yeah, I mean, the whole reason I started mine was just give me a cheap excuse to talk to cool people. So far it's been working out.
Yeah. We I mean, Jake and I I remember when we were starting and we had started having guests on and stuff, and there was a few where like, man, there's no way they're gonna come on. Like, there's no way they're gonna talk to us. Like, it's not gonna happen. And then we'd hit them up and ask, because you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
And so we'd hit them up, and they'd say, sure, we'll come on. It's like, oh my god, like, it's happening. Jack Vicente was one of those. I was like, I don't know if because Jack's an older guy, and I was like, I don't think he's gonna be into it, but he said yes, and I was like, oh, he was one of the white whales, as we call them. We've got a few on our list. Everyone has their list of white whales of people that they really want to have on, but maybe they're intimidated by them or they don't think they'll go for it. And Jack Vicente was one, and we had him on. I want to have another coral episode with him. Recent one, like Derek Roddy hit us up actually and asked to come on, and I thought that was awesome. You over time you really get surprised at who listens to the shows. The longer it's out and stuff, the more people find it. You really do get surprised at the people who listen. And but yeah, like I said, just sort of letting it do its thing.
So do you have any plans for more crocodilian content going forward? Do you have to worry about competition, so to speak?
I mean, we're definitely not against it. There's a book I'm reading right now called Tears for Crocodilia, and the author of that hit me up to do a review of it for the website. So I'm very close to being done with that. And he's got a paleontology background, so he's not necessarily like a herper, but he wrote this book on crocodilians and sort of like their place in history and sort of religion and stuff, especially in like Egypt with Nile crocs and whatnot. But he talks about sort of the current state of what's happening to some of the species like gharials and things like that.
Yeah.
So we plan to have him on once I finish the book, and you should definitely check it out. I'll send you the link to that if you're interested. But it's been a phenomenal book. Like, I really enjoyed it. He sent me the PDF version of it, and I was like, I ended up buying a copy because I don't know about you, but I got to have like a physical, tangible copy. Like, the digital ebook thing is cool and all, but it's just not the same.
Yeah, I'm a printer by nature, so I kind of detest ebooks with a passion. So
I gotta have that physical.
Take food from my mouth. So
yeah. So I ended up buying a copy, and it's really good. It actually led me to buy another book that he had mentioned in his book. He had talked about this other book. I have to look it up. I ended up buying it off Amazon used for a couple bucks. But yeah, I mean, crocodilian content, like I definitely want to do a dwarf caiman episode, just because that's a species that a lot of people are keeping. It seems like a lot of people that are doing stuff with crocodilians are much more in sort of the academic side of things.
Yeah. Admittedly, by their very nature, they're kind of hard to keep in a herpetocultural setting.
Yeah, so the book he talked about was Dragon Songs, Love and Adventure Among Crocodiles, Alligators, and Other Dinosaur Relations. And that one's by Vladimir Dinitz.
I've heard that one before.
Yeah, I'm pretty anxious to get into it. The one I'm currently reading that I was talking about is Tears for Crocodilia: Evolution, Ecology, and the Disappearance of One of the World's Most Ancient Animals. And it's by Zach Fitzner. So,
yeah. But I will say there's one guy who kind of keeps crocodilians kind of in a herpetocultural setting, though. Let me put it this way: he started keeping crocodilians in kind of herpetoculturally wise, and it's now morphed into a AZA associated zoo. So,
yeah,
it's Chris Dieter's down in Angleton, Texas.
Okay, that name sounds familiar.
Yeah,
yeah.
Like just got his 3rd generation Niles hatched out.
That's cool.
And he's working on a breeding project. I don't know how much he wants me to share with us, but he's working on a breeding project with T positive albino Niles. So
really,
yeah,
that's cool. I love Cubans, man. Like something about those and the American crocs too. That's another one it's surprising how many people don't realize we have a species of crocodile.
Yeah,
that's a species that doesn't get much attention or love, and they're really cool. Again, it's just because it's right here in our own backyard, man. But the Cubans in particular are really interesting to me, just because of all the stories I've heard about them, and pattern and color wise, I think they're really pretty. I like them a lot, and I've always wanted dwarf caimans. I don't think it's ever going to really happen. We just had an episode with Jack Oliver. He lives on the upstate here in South Carolina, and he's got a dwarf, and so we talked about that a pretty good bit on that episode. And I'm gonna have to just live vicariously through him, because I don't have the space. Like, it's one of those things where the time and space and dedication I don't have for it. I can't swing it. Same with the reason I don't have a lot of monitors and stuff. It's just
it's
a lot. Snakes spoil you. I say that a lot. With the space and the food, and snakes make it easy.
Yeah. Well, speaking of upstate South Carolina, another person you might look into is Dr. Chris Carmichael, one of my old professors.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I know that name too.
Yeah. He's done some pretty interesting stuff in herpetoculture over the years. So
I
think at one point he said when he had him, he had the only pair of albino olive pythons in the U.S. So.
Oh wow.
Then he sold him away so he could afford to start his premier dog breeding project. So.
Yeah. There's all kinds of cool stuff out there, man. Phil has some. He has water pythons. I don't know. I've never had olives. I don't think Jake's ever had olives. I know we have some friends that keep them. Lyasis have really never done a whole lot for me. I really like Sabus. But outside of that, I don't know. I don't have much of a desire to keep those guys.
Okay. So if there's like one species of reptile that you could keep, what that you don't have, what would that be?
Bush vipers, Atheris stuff. That's a genus that I was absolutely obsessed with as a kid. There was a point where I had just a binder and I printed any web page I could find that had information on those, like bite reports, all of it. I couldn't get enough, and that's still a genus I'm very much interested in, and I hope one day I can keep. Unfortunately, when you're married, some of these hopes and dreams of things like that kind of get backburnered indefinitely. But that's another one where I just have to live vicariously through the people I know that have them, and that's such a cool group, man. There's few snakes that look as badass as a sedge viper, Great Lakes bush viper, whatever you want to call it, and squams are really cool. The whole genus is just awesome, and there's something about small arboreal vipers and pit vipers that I just really like. Like, I don't want cobras or mambas or any of that like super fast sexy stuff. Like, I want the tiny little tree vipers that just hang out, and you can keep them in smaller cages, like enclosures, and have them decked out, naturalistic or naturally. And that's a dream right there, is to have that stuff, and like Ophryaechus and Bothriechus and some of the other Bothriopsis, whatever you want to label them as. Like, there's so many cool little arboreal species that I just am really, really interested in, and maybe one day they'll happen. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
What's yours?
Oof. Probably a crocodilian. and kind of basic for a crocodilian person, but American alligator, just because that's what I have the most experience with, and you just can't go wrong with a gator.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, that book, the one by Fitzner, he talks about sort of the overall intelligence of crocodilians and sort of I guess some of the recent studies that have been done that show some more social behaviors that maybe we didn't think they had before.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting. I mean, the first like half of that book, there was a ton of stuff I learned that I was just completely unaware of when it came to crocodilians. And I don't. It's always sucked because I mean, like alligators in particular, like people around here see them and they think that they're just these like dumb predators that are just running on pure sort of instinct. And I'm like, they're actually really smart. Like they're people train them. Zoos train them. They they recognize their names. Like they recognize the people that are in charge of keeping them. I don't know. It's one of those things where I think that's just really cool. And for some reason, people think that they're just these dumb giant dinosaurs. And there's so much more to them than what you see. Like a transformer.
Yeah, like we had John Brugan on, who's the curator of the St. Augustine Alligator Farm, and he was telling us about how they, for I can't remember the exact reasoning, but their Siamese crocodiles had laid clutch eggs, and they decided to let the female hatch them out and raise them out naturally with the male.
Mm-hmm.
And they said he observed the male actually teaching his young vocalization calls.
Yeah, Fitzner's book talks about seeing some, like thinking that there was some sort of sightings of, I think, Niles or maybe another species, like actively, it looked like they were like playing with each other, like they were chasing each other around. It wasn't aggression or anything like that, but he talked about that. It's just it's again, another thing, herps, especially crocodilians, there's so much more nuance to them, and we just don't see them enough to sort of catch those behaviors in the wild. It just
and just from all different croc people I've talked to over the years, they've told me that they've observed that animals that are raised up by themselves, you cannot put them in a group because for some reason they have literally zero social skills, so they're always getting into fights. So you if you want to keep them social, you have to raise them with all their siblings or other young animals, or ideally at least initially with their mom. So
I mean, you think about it, it's dogs aren't terribly different in that regard. I mean, my dog, he's a rescue, and when we first got him, I don't know if he was just kept outside, chained up or something, because he like didn't know how to be a dog when we got him. Like he won't chase a ball, he won't fetch, he won't do any of that. And when we first were introducing him to other dogs, he was really nervous. He really didn't want anything to do with them. But now after you let him play for a little bit and he realized like, oh, okay, like we're not here to hurt each other. Like, no, this isn't a threat.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's a very similar thing where it would make sense that if they're in a group for most of their lives, that they'd adapt to that sort of hierarchy of things and whatnot. But
yeah. Is there anything in particular you want to talk about now, or
what else are you keeping besides scrubs?
What got an adult pair of Dominican red mountain boas.
Nice.
So really looking forward to those guys. Hopefully breeding. I haven't had any success breeding them, but I haven't really tried too hard. Really, So this year I'm going to really try and get some weight in the female before I cool her down. Then I have an adult female diamond carpet that I'm going to pair with. My buddy has a trio, not trio, pair. So this winter I'm going to, send her over to his collection and see if we get something, get some eggs out of that.
Nice.
Got a pair of. This past weekend I picked up a few pairs of snakes and picked up a pair of Eastern Stimson pythons yesterday morning, and a pair of gopher snakes a little bit before that. Let's see here, what else I'm missing. Got my first snake I still have. It's a male IJ carpet, and just ordered a baby female for him. So eventually, grow her up and maybe breed them.
Awesome.
So,
is you're up in Ohio?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool, man. It's the Pituophis are awesome. I appreciate them for what they are and everything, and I like them. But Jake is he loves his Pituophis, and our buddy Chris, he has a bunch of Pituophis, and I would love to get some Kankakee bulls and some northern pines and like I said, a male southern pine for my female, but that's a lot of snake, man. It's a lot of space to commit to, and I'm already like so strapped. It's tough. Like I said, I mean, Jake has some just killer stuff. He has some fork line gophers, and I don't know if they're as enjoyable because they're just super pissy all the time. But his southerns, like his albino southerns, man, they're puppy dogs. You can just reach in there and grab them. And they're just these monster pines. So I have the appreciation for them, but I don't know that I'll only sort of dip a toe in that pool. I don't really want to go too heavy into those.
Yeah. See. I mean, I don't know what specific locality these Pituophis are. These gophers are.
Mm-hmm.
They're just sold as Pituophis cantenifer.
Yeah.
So I don't know. For all I know, they could be a bull snake. So.
Yeah, I mean they're fun. They definitely have a lot of personality, man. My southern, she cracks me up because if I'm in the room, she's like putting her little nose in the vent hole, and you see her little tongue just coming out of it. And she's just like begging. Like I walk in, and it's like a dog, man. It's like the Ackies. They just sitting at the door clawing at it, wanting out. And I have really enjoyed the Ackies. That was another one that was just as a kid I wanted some so bad, but when you don't have a job, it's kind of hard to make those things happen. And then you get to be an adult and you're like, wait a second, I've got money and some of it's disposable and I can finally do the things I want to do. And I got my pair from Alan Stevens at Origins Reptile, and they're fun, man. They're so cool. Like that's the first lizards I've had outside of geckos in years. And they're fun. They're a blast. I don't regret getting them at all. Actually, they're a lot of fun. They're really not super handleable. If I want to basically have skin to skin contact with them, I got to have food on me. But I wanted like those in the Kimberly rocks. That's sort of the extent of what I want to do with monitors. The tree monitors and stuff would be awesome, but again, space and the time that you have to put into those is just more than I can give. So sticking with the Odatria and the smaller stuff. So
yeah.
And that's I can understand why monitor guys are so hardcore though about their monitors and why they're so into them. It's like because they are like seeing the gears turning, with the Ackies, even though they're a smaller, they seem to be a little more lizard brained, no pun intended, but they definitely seem to be more I guess primal is kind of the way I could describe it. It's not like the what I've heard about like the Kims and some of the other stuff where they're they're actively sort of thinking and they realize that they can differentiate the things from the environment a little better, it seems like.
Yeah.
But the Ackies, like I said, they're fun. I do want some Kims. I don't know when that's going to happen because that's another thing that space-wise, I don't want to skimp when it comes to the monitors and the stuff that really uses space. I really don't want to short them there. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Oh, also forgot. I have a male Argentine black and white tegu that probably eventually going to move off of him just for space reasons. Just not that he's just not a small enough enclosure. It's more just to free up space for future projects. But and in about a week or so, I'm going to be picking up a trio of juvenile smooth front caimans from a friend of mine.
Nice.
So
that's cool. Yeah, man, that's
like Paleosuchus, only crocodilians legal in Ohio without a permit. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They're awesome, man. That was as a kid again. That was one that I was always like, that's the coolest thing ever. Like it's a small croc.
Yeah.
And of course they're small, but they're still a big commitment. It's still a decent sized animal when you're talking full grown, but
it would dwarf is a relative term.
Yeah.
It's not like a dwarf.
Go ahead.
It's not like a dwarf monitor where it's like literally a
right
foot long monitor. It's not like, no, it's still big as like the majority of like alligators you see in zoos or something like that, full grown, or else it should be.
What's your time with the tegu been like? Is he pretty
It's
handleable?
very
I mean,
thing is he's very food motivated,
mm,
so and he is very much associated with me with food, so it's actually a bit risky to go in there sometimes. So
yeah.
because the first thing it does is he jumps at me and with mouth open, it's like oh, you're jumping just high enough to grab something very sensitive. So
They're cool. I had a buddy who had one. He was part of the Georgia Herp Society, and he and I last minute one day he called me. He's like, "Hey man," he's like, "I'm doing we have a booth at this school for some sort of event or something." He's like, "And the person I was supposed to do it with backed out. Can you come down here and do it?" And I said, "Sure." And drove down there, and he had his. That was the first time I had my hands on a Brettles python, which is what started that love for that species. It was a big female he had, and then he had a black and white with him, and that was sort of the first time I'd really played around with those. And his was like dog tame, just cruised around, just chilled, like never showed any signs of any nervousness or anything like that. And like that's a fun lizard. Again, that's another one that I really have zero desire to keep just because of the level of involvement. But I get the appeal. I definitely understand why people like tegus and want to have them. I can also see those things being a real nightmare if they're not tame and still nervous and things like that. Which I just found out recently. I didn't realize they could drop their tails.
Yeah, I mean, I
know
was
that,
completely
but I know unaware.
I mean, I knew that, but I know it was like something like I guess only happens in super rare situations, as far as I know. So,
well, the only reason I found out is because I got a text from one of my old roommates who's a vet here locally, and someone had a red tegu in like their workshop area, and it was clearly missing. Like half its tail had regrown, and I was like, I texted some of my friends. I was like, "Can tegus drop their tails?" And they're like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, okay." I told those people, like, if you catch that red tegu, I told them, like, put out a trap with a can of tuna or something or eggs or whatever. They trap it and let me know, and I'll come get it. And then I asked my buddy at DNR because they weren't sure if they should call DNR or animal control, and I have a friend in DNR, and so he's like, no, they'd call us. And I'm like, I'm assuming if you guys got it, you'd destroy it. And they're like, yeah. So I told him, I was like, if you get it, let me know and I'll come get it. I don't know what the hell I'll do with it if I do get it. But they ended up letting it go behind the shop again or something. So I was like, okay, whatever, But
yeah,
it's wild.
It kind of reminds me of a story. This was actually before I was even born. So like back in like I guess in mid '90s, person that used to live up above where my family business's print shop is located at. They had a boa constrictor that got out and was missing for several months. And I noticed over the summer that the local rabbit population seemed to have gone down a little bit. And just one day, one of the former workers there, he was moving pallets and he just put his hand underneath a pallet and he just felt something. Pulled back, looked down, there it was, just coiled up, flicking his tongue at him. So the first thing he does is he calls my very ophicophobic uncle. It's like, hey Zach, take a look at this. Then just as soon as he gets there, flips a board over to show it to him. So of course he ran away. So
there was I used to work as a merchandiser for a Budweiser distributor in grocery stores and stuff, and one of the Coke guys, I guess he knew that I kept snakes or something, but he was telling me that when they were like moving pallets with like bottles of like plastic bottles, like the 6-packs or whatever of Coke on it, I don't know if they were like if it was they moved a pallet off of another pallet or if it was at the bottom of a pallet, but there was a cane brake just chilling on one of these pallets in their warehouse. Because then when they told me that, I was like, no way. And then he showed me a picture, and it was like, sure as hell, a little cane brake. I was like, that would have sucked. Like someone would have reached in there and got tagged or something. That wouldn't have been fun.
And then everybody was like, "What happened to you?" "I got bit by a snake." "Yeah, right."
Yeah.
How would that thing even get in there? It's like,
who knows, man.
Just left the pallets outside next to the woods for a few days, and then brought them inside.
Yeah,
my best guess.
There's no telling, man. It's amazing. It never ceases to amaze me how an animal with no arms and legs is so good at getting in the goofiest places.
I did see someone say that if you ever see a snake slithering around, it's very almost impossible to get to the location, and you wonder how the hell that snake got there. Chances are it's a rat snake. So.
Yep. My Jansenii, man, when I first got them, the male, he got out like twice. It got to the point where I did put him in a rack until I could figure out another solution. But he got out, and then once I realized he wasn't in the tub that I had him in initially, I started looking around the house, and he was somehow got in our pantry and was like almost on the top shelf. Because I remember I was like looking around, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna check the pantry. And lo and behold, he was like chilling under a can or something. So I don't know what he was doing in there, but and that same one got out at one point. And my daughter was like, I saw there's a snake loose, and we were like, what color was it? And she was like, it was I think she said it was white. And I was like, I think she was seeing things. Like, there's no way. And so I was like, wait a second, let me go check. And I looked, and that same male Jansenii had gotten out again somehow. And that's what she saw, because when we found it again, she's like, that's the one I told you about. We thought that maybe she was just messing with us or something. We are like, whatever, you didn't see any snake. Sure enough, it's that damn Jansenii again. So I don't know. It's that problem's been fixed, but that was frustrating because, of course, my wife would find it when I was at work and not at home, and so she'd be like, what do I do? And it's a pissed off Jansenii. It's a Gonyosoma, so it's naturally just not a fun snake to play with. And she handled it like a champ and got it taken care of.
Anything you want to close out with then?
I don't think so. If anyone wants to get a hold of me or see any of the stuff we're doing, we're on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube under the Herpetoculture Network. That's where all our shows and stuff get uploaded. So it's on, if you can find it under the Herpetoculture Network on Spotify and iTunes and Google Podcasts, Audible, Amazon Podcasts, I think iHeartRadio for some reason. I find that there's a lot of these weird like secondary sites like Podbean and stuff for whatever reason, like your RSS feed somehow finds its way to their website, and so it's on there too. I don't know, but it's on all the major platforms. You can find me and my stuff at Palmetto Coast Exotics on Facebook and Instagram. Definitely am more active on Instagram than I am on Facebook in terms of the Palmetto Coast page and stuff, because Facebook's page system thing is just a train wreck. I don't know if you've ever had to use it, but it's a nightmare.
A little bit, yeah.
They keep trying to make things more convenient, and it seems like it's only making things worse. Because they got the whole like meta suite now, and it's like I just want to check my messages, man. Like I got to jump through all these hoops just to read my comments. Damn. But yeah, got a couple things on Morph Market right now for sale. Some Diones and some really nice caramel Miami corns that are posset for a couple cool things. And yeah, so tomorrow night, Monday, the 1st, is Snakes and Stogies 129. I think Lucas Lee from Centralian Exotics is going to be our guest. He's also part of the NPR network crew. But yeah, Herpetoculture magazine, that's still out. Like, people can still read that. It's free digitally. If you go to our website, herpetoculturenetwork.com, you can still read all those there, and all the articles are on the website too. So feel free to check that out. We're also we're keeping that site going in terms of the articles and stuff. I haven't posted anything recently, so if anybody is compelled to write articles on things or whatever, and they want somewhere to put them, hit me up. We'll throw them on the website. But yeah, that's about it.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Looking forward to talking to you later.
Yeah, man. We'll get you on THP here soon.
Oh, flatter. Thanks.
Yeah.
Talk to you later. Man.